Hey, what's up, guys? It's Tommy here. I'm a black Latino trans man living in Florida, and this is my story, or parts of my story. Today, I want to expand about the part of me speaking to my parents and how I came out and the process of coming out. Now, notice that I say it's a process. I feel like in the LGBT community, and especially in the trans community, when it comes to coming out and dealing with our families that are religious, we don't really have enough information and resources to do so in a way that keeps our families cohesive, right? Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people that are going to experience their families turning their backs on them. There are some people that are going to experience their families just having an all out freak out because of the misinformation around being trans. But there's also that spark of hope that your transition won't uproot your life, right? So when I was coming out, um, my parents had already known that I was like gay, right? So they knew that, and I had already done things for them specifically to like try to combat that. So I had gone to therapy and things of that nature. And when I had come out, it was later on in life, but I had already like gone through. I want to call it the conversion therapy process. It wasn't necessarily that per se, but it felt like that. Um, uh, and when I came back from that particular process, I just decided. Well, I didn't really decide, but I got kicked out of church, and I still was doing stuff with my father. My father was a minister. We had an okay relationship, but yeah, my exact like church life had got uprooted pretty hard, um, and that hurt a lot. It hurt to my core, and it did cause me to do things, or I didn't have the coping mechanisms at all to deal with that, so I didn't deal with the best way. That's when I really started getting heavy into drugs and drinking, because when they tell you something like, "Oh, you're gonna go to hell because you are X, Y, Z," and you can't change no matter what you do, then you're like, "Well, I'm just gonna party and live it up," right? My feelings about me going to hell have changed, but that's a whole other video. I I tried to live my life as much as I possibly could in a very weird, in the closet, not in the closet type way. Um, and I still do that to this very day. It's kind of a weird dichotomy how I live because I'm not necessarily stealth. I just don't consider myself the most out person. I'm not loud, you know. Uh, and I look up to people who can be loud. Like I just, again, whole other video. So when I when I started coming to terms with myself being trans and going to therapy and stuff, I used to go to the support group, and I saw one trans woman and the way she would speak to her parents, and it bothered my soul. Like, I guess her mom or your dad, like, at least they were such nice people to her, and she would get down their throats when they misgendered her or whatever, and I was like, yo, I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I lead with love, right? So whatever happens, I lead with love. I'm compassionate to my mom, my dad, because first of all, my mom and my dad had been suggested to kick me out of the house when I was like 14, 15 years old, and they never did it. Thank God they never did it, because maybe life would be different for me right now. Honestly, I got they didn't support me like, oh man, we're gonna support your, that you're gay or whatever, but they didn't kick me out of the house either. So we had like conflict in the house, but it wasn't to the point where it was explosive. And I never, ever, ever thought less of my parents, ever. So when I finally came out to my mom and my dad about my transition, I just knew that it was going to be hard. And I knew that I didn't have all the answers. I didn't at all. I was going into this not necessarily blind, but just knowing in my heart of hearts that this is where I was supposed to be. So when I came out, I decided to use my therapist, and my therapist was there when I did it. So that way, if there was any things that they needed to get out, my therapist would have the answers, and sort of like to make it a softer landing. For God's sakes, sometimes people who are trans, in my opinion, forget that when you say they're transitioning to someone who is religious and they're having to accept you or to even tolerate you, depending on what type of religion, excuse me, depending on what type of religion that they had followed, you are now challenging their belief system. So, as much as they want to love you because they're your parents, there's a belief system. You have to understand that people had died, martyred for their beliefs. We just had that recently. We've had like I think two men in particular that were very passionate in their beliefs about Gaza to the point where they burned themselves alive over a belief, right? Over something that they believed in so passionately. Okay, so when now I am presenting this to my parents who believe a certain way, I'm going to have to give them some time and some space because challenging someone's belief system is not necessarily an easy thing. That's why a lot of us trans people, when we come out of the closet and we come out to our families and whatever, we get a lot of visceral reactions. Visceral, like, ah, because you're challenging the way someone believes. Right? So I'm not saying that or I'm not condoning horrible reactions because some people really do like react crazy, like, right? I am just trying to get a sense of understanding because when you can understand something, you have an easier time navigating it than if you didn't understand, right? And it also helps the blow to your system when you don't get acceptance or tolerance because you realize what's going on. So the other thing that I did, these are just things that I did on my part, is I learned a communications model that I can be in the room with people who don't agree with me and still have a respect for each other's beliefs. Because on the other side of their beliefs is yours. Right? And so I find that if I'm in the room with people who simply won't respect the fact that we believe very differently and that we have to find a way to get along, that's when I usually have a boundary. I'm like, I am not going to be around these people. And I go somewhere else. Or they go somewhere else, whichever of the two. But I understand that we're just having a belief. We're not having, this is not an opinion thing. It's a belief thing, right? And opinions are easily malleable, right? Beliefs are not. So my mom, my dad eventually came around. They got educated. I wasn't the one to educate them, by the way. They simply started watching documentaries about trans people, and we kept having conversations when there was certain times, and I did a couple of things I think that helped our situation: the therapy, the the communication style model that I learned, and the other thing was that they also got educated, right? And so I just never attacked them for their beliefs because I understood. I was raised in that environment. When we had to have a conversation about it, I was just very loving and very compassionate, and they also were very loving and very compassionate to me. I also did a couple of things, in my opinion, that helped. Like I got clean and sober, you know, and when before my transition, they had a lot to be happy and a lot to be proud of me for. And post transition, I'm still working on that to continue to make them proud and to continue to make myself proud also. Um, but after that, I had like went back to school and got my degree. As again, I got clean and sober. I started working. I kept more jobs. I started my own business. You know, my mom and my dad could talk about me in ways that were uplifting and beautiful. And eventually it came around that like they could call me their son and not have an issue with it. Like, and I do want to preface with this too, or I want to say this. Well, not preface because I already said it. My particular transition was not one of like, oh my god, I can't believe it. Most of my friends and my family we were waiting for you to say this. That's the response that I got. So I do want to say that because I think a lot of times people don't tell you the details and you expect everybody's story to be the same. There's one thing that I've noticed and I've become very well aware of now being in my 16 years of transition. The trans community is vast, and that's why you can't put one trans person in the same box as another. Like it's just we're all very different people. We may all transition, but we're all transitioning. We're very different at very different paces. Uh, the end game is very different for some of us. Some of us can keep our families and keep our loved ones close to us, and some of our loved ones they just won't come around. They never will, and that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that you believe in something so much and you turn your back on your family. But again, people will die for their beliefs. So I hope this helps. If you want more information on the communication style model, there is an institute called the Yes Institute that they have a communications course that I think works very well, even if you're not trans. It's been used for people in workplace, like or just when you have a conflict with someone. Anyone. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a trans or gay thing or whatever. It could be anything. I think especially in this time where we're having like these major culture wars, they're stupid in my opinion. Excuse me, I'm still fighting this cold. Uh, yeah, I think now is the time where people really need it. Right? We need to find a reason or a way to bring back people's humanity again and be a more cohesive society. I don't like the way or the direction that society is going at the current moment. I think it can lend itself to be uh, horrific, to be exact how I feel, you know. But my mom loves me, adores me. I love my mom. My dad, rest in peace. I love my father. My dad loved me too. I still got to be who I am. My dad got to be who he is. My mom gets to be who she is. Every story of LGBT doesn't have to end up in tragedy. You guys have a blessed day.